What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Toronto and Jets podcast. I'm your host, Will Parkinson, at Will Pod 11 on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, all 32 Pod, TOJ Talks. Busy time of year for the Jets right now, obviously amidst the coaching search, amidst a GM search, eventually probably amidst the quarterback search. The offseason is officially here. Obviously, didn't talk too much about Sunday's win against the Miami Dolphins. I guess I'll start there, and I want to get into a little bit of the coaching search, where I'm at with the candidates, what I've heard, but more importantly, kind of just talking about what we've kind of observed so far through the coaching search and GM search. I have a special Saturday TOJ Talks episode, which will be pretty exciting. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but. From the Jets Dolphins game, really weird game. The Jets could not have started worse. Tip pass from Devontae to Rodgers on should have been a run play. RPO to throw it to Devontae, gets tipped and intercepted. That the defense looked flat, and they run the flea flicker that they probably wanted to run earlier in the year. They emptied out a flea flicker, cool throwback with Rodgers. He doesn't pull the trigger to Garrett because, as we know, doesn't really love throwing Garrett the ball that much, and gets Devontae killed. And you're like, wow, man, this is going to be. It's going to be ugly. Leading up into that game, it was a lot about, draft pick and, knocking the Dolphins out of the playoffs potentially and things like that. And kind of unfortunately on both sides, because of the way the 1 o'clock window moved, the Jets only moved up, one pick, by winning, even though, I think they went from 8 to 7. But there was not really much movement. They could go as high potentially as 6 if the Jags had pulled it out, but, they didn't. And then you go into the game, you're like, all right, like draft pick's not really going to change. Maybe they would fall a spot or two, depending on the Lions-Vikings game, but, at least knock the Dolphins out of the playoffs. And within a blink of an eye, the Broncos are up like 45-0. And you realize that nothing really is going to matter here. Like the Jets, this game just could not matter any less for anybody. It was fun to see Aaron Rodgers throw 4 touchdowns for sure. He got number 500, Tyler Conklin, Lazard, Brees getting one, and a lot of guys just get involved, and that was obviously really cool to see. Garrett gets over 100 catches and gets his 1,000+ yards. Devontae's up over 1,000. Brees ends the year clinching the game with a receiving touchdown. You hope he can build on some confidence going into next year with the way that the year kind of ended for him, and overall just obviously not his best season for sure. Quincy kind of had a nice bounce back. The Dolphins were horrendous, but again, the game really didn't matter too much. I thought the one thing, the touchdown at Devontae, he went and grabbed the football there, and you're like, this isn't number 500, and you just thought maybe, hey, is this maybe the last time these guys play together? It was certainly a thought there. So, don't really want to talk too much. Tyreek Hill requested a trade after the game. He quit on his team. Look, he had some really good years in Miami, but I'd rather have Garrett Wilson for the next 5 to 7 years and throughout the totality of this deal than Tyreek Hill in a blip and a lot of all of what he kind of brings to the table. So I want to move off that game, like the regular season 5-12. Throughout the offseason, kind of break down a little bit. I want to talk on future episodes a little bit about the way a lot of these Jets players and guys that'll be here next year were deployed, in the Garrett Wilsons and Brees Halls of the world, and even a little bit about some of the tight end room and kind of how that may take shape going forward and things like that. So we'll kind of get into that as the offseason progresses. I'll also talk a little bit about the defense and how I felt like this year, even with Saleh and then, in the post-Saleh era, which is, apparently when Robert Saleh was here, everything was great whenever you hear about him. But, I thought a lot of the usage of some of the sub-package guys, of some of the guys that have special skill sets and things like that are maybe more one-dimensional players were just misused all year. And it's something I want to kind of get into and how they can improve in 25. Let's get into the head coach and GM search. About 5 o'clock, 5:30 here on the East Coast on Wednesday night. So far, guys that have interviewed, we saw the Mike Vrabels, we talked Mike Vrabel, we talked Ron Rivera. One thing I didn't mention with Rivera that I'm very curious about, and as you'll hear, because some of these names, the reason I bring up Rivera is I've heard he's open to being a DC again. And if he's open to being a defensive coordinator, if you were to bring in a younger offensive mind, maybe an offensive coordinator type, maybe it's a Joe Brady, a Josh McCown, whoever it may be, do the Jet of Brian Greasy, who we'll talk about. But, if you bring in one of those guys, they're going to need their Wes Phillips or Wade Phillips, sorry, I apologize, Wes Phillips, Vikings offensive coordinator. Wade Phillips, to their Sean McVay. For the example, when the Rams hired McVay, they brought Wade Phillips over to be the assistant head coach and defensive coordinator and kind of take a lot of the responsibility from McVay early on as he started to learn the ropes and transition from a play caller, into one of the best head coaches in the league. So just a name to watch there. Could be a good pairing potentially with a few of these other names. Moving forward here, Rex Ryan is now interviewed. Look, I'll keep my thoughts short on Rex. Everyone's talked about it a million times. The times were fun with Rex, especially early on. It was a jolt in the arm. It was a lot of fun, man. 2009, 2010, and the first about 11 to 13 games of 2011, they were awesome. It was a great period in Jets history. No question about it. He is an adrenaline boost. He is crack cocaine. Like he is. I'm not even being political here. He's very Trumpish. He gives you the shot in the arm. He kind of gets you fired up, the bravado, the whole thing. The issue with Rex is that he's been out of coaching now, almost a decade. And it's not that he's probably still a really good coach in a lot of ways. And I think he keeps up with the NFL. And I think he has his son working in the league now. And I think he knows a lot of really smart people. And he studies the game, right? And he talks about the game. He talks about all these teams every day. So it's not like he's not plugged in and not tapped in. But the NFL is a different game than it was 8 to 10 years ago. We even saw in Buffalo when he didn't have the same type of roster, what happened. Not just take the Jets side out of it, just, and look, it's really nice how much Rex loves the Jets and loves the organization and loves the city of New York. And all these things are great. And they're admirable. And I'm not saying that he couldn't potentially do a good job, especially early on. Longevity-wise, I think is huge questions. And I think the two questions I had with Rex, and the reason why I wasn't high on his candidacy, and I'm still not, although I somehow think he'll end up being a finalist, is because the two things that I don't think he's going to be able to do is build an offensive staff and develop a quarterback. And if he can't do either of those things, and he had the perfect opportunity 2 days ago on the radio. Who knows what he said in the interview, right? But, he was asked essentially, hey, what's your staff going to look like? Not necessarily names, but, I don't know yet. We'll see. I'm going to build the greatest staff the world's ever seen. Like, all right, man. That stuff to me, save it. So, listen, he'll probably be a finalist. It's a lot of fun with Rex, but there's a lot better candidates, in my opinion, in the mix. Now let's transition to some of the names, here. Guys that I'm higher on. Everyone's kind of familiar with the list. Darren Rizzi, probably interviewing as a potential special teams coordinator, with one of the other guys, obviously familiar with the organization and things like that. But, as of today, guys like Steve Spagnuolo, requested that was kind of one out of left field. Matt Nagy interviewed today. Look, Nagy was a better head coach than I think people remember. Made the playoffs twice. Was a coach of the year. The Bears were top 5 in offense and top 10 in defense and the double doink and the whole thing. All that said, for another organization to let him be a retread. I think, again, he's a better coach than people give him credit for. But I don't think that should be the Jets' problem, in any way, shape, or form. So if I was them, that's what I would like to kind of see, from a Jets perspective of just, I just don't know that he is how, I would like to see the Jets kind of go about things. Brian Flores, Aaron Glenn, Josh McCown are names that much more interest me personally. Again, and Arthur Smith, not even sure he's going to take an interview, to be honest with you. Was a runner-up in 2019, or was runner-up in 2021, was offered a job this past offseason to be an offensive assistant, told the Jets no. So, don't see that one happening. Bobby Slowick, absolutely not. You got on the list, Vance Josephs had a really awesome year in Denver. Again, a decision and a choice for some other organization to make at this point. Joe Brady, I really like. I'm a fan of. I think there's a lot of redeeming qualities potentially there. I have some questions about, he was the hot name coordinator, potential head coach 3 or 4 years ago, and it didn't go so well in Carolina. And you just wonder, hey, is he a really good coordinator or is he potential head coach material? I think again, I'd be willing to take the risk. He's a guy that he's probably certainly should be in the top 5 to 6 names you're looking at for sure. But I'm not sure he's up at one or two for me. Um, Aaron Glenn and Brian Flores, I think, are probably the realistic two names you're looking at this point, with Vrabel likely to be the Patriots coach. From a Glenn perspective, I think he's done a really good job as a DC. He worked as a scout. He obviously played for the Jets, worked for the Jets, has been in great organizations. He's helped rebuild organizations. Like all of these things, check those boxes. I get the solid thing of like, hey, defensive coordinator, never been a head coach before. How's he going to transition? I think Aaron Glenn's a genuine dude, and I think that's a place where Robert Saleh did struggle. Did it come across as genuine? Did the speeches and did the intent always come across as genuine? For Aaron Glenn, you hear nothing but genuine love for that guy, and he put out a masterclass on Sunday Night Football, and you shouldn't get hired just off that. But he's a guy who all 6 openings have requested an interview. That should tell you something. I would have no problem with Aaron Glenn being the Jets' next head coach. Do I think it's as exciting as Mike Vrabel? No. Do I think it's as creative as Josh McCown or Joe Brady? No. But I think that it's a sharp hire, and the Jets have, as much as we talk about defensive guys and how could you? They've had success with defensive guys. So, especially pending who he would bring over. Would he bring over someone from the Lions staff? Would he bring over someone from, his past? Maybe guys he made connections with in New Orleans, guys he made connections with, elsewhere in Houston, different places. Like, you'd have to see his offensive staff, but I think that goes with anybody. So I would have gone with Vrabel too. It's, of course, offensive coordinator he's going to have to nail, but extremely well respected. Would be a fan of them bringing Aaron Glenn back, and it would check a lot of the boxes. And kind of when people look at Rex as that fan favorite, the guy like Aaron Glenn did more for this organization than Rex Ryan did. So would be happy there. Brian Flores is the other one, and I'm going to talk about Josh McCown quickly, and then just transition to GM here before I wrap. Look, I understand there's red flags with Flores, no question about it. Even if you take the lawsuit out of it, I'm not going to get into that. Just put in hey, how did it go in Miami? I think he's an excellent, excellent defensive coach and defensive play caller. Now, does that mean he's going to be a great head coach? I don't know, because we've seen, he did a lot of really nice things in Miami. It didn't end so great. I think that, he wears thin. At least he did wear thin. I think he was in the mindset coming from New England at the time that he had to be a Belichick-like. And it's really tough. And he'll motherfuck you and the whole thing. And, he had the young quarterback and he had Fitz there who has been outspoken about, some of the trying times there in Miami. Tua has been outspoken. Again, two sides to every story. And frankly, we've seen a lot of immaturity from Tua still. And we've seen a lot of immaturity when Ryan Fitzpatrick was here and these different things. And I thought he got a lot out of, he rattled through offensive coordinators. That was a problem. But to Brian Flores' credit, he went and worked for Mike Tomlin. He's now gone and worked for Kevin O'Connell. If he took 10% of their personalities, he was able to kind of mold it and get humbled a little bit by losing his job there, obviously. And, second chance. He's a guy from New York, understands the city, understands the culture here and the whole thing. I think with the right offensive coordinator, if he were to bring over a Josh McCown as OC, and he's got ties to Mike Borgonzi and these different guys, if that's your pairing of Borgonzi, Flores, that scheme would be pretty fun, man. Sauce and Michael Carter and these guys playing a lot of man coverage and getting a blitz with guys like McDonald and Jermaine and Quincy, some different blitzing packages and these different things. That'd be exciting. So, again, I'm not saying he's a perfect candidate by any means, but I think for where we're at with the process, you could do a lot worse than Brian Flores and Aaron Glenn. Lastly is Josh McCown. And I know Joe and Connor talked about it yesterday a bit. Do I think he's probably a better fit at this point in his career as an offensive coordinator? Absolutely. But I talked about this with Meigs and Dan maybe about 6 weeks ago with McCown and Jim Leonard is bring these guys in for head coaching interviews. Hey, you're probably really interviewing as a coordinator, but let's give you a shot. Let's see what you got in the room. There's something to be said for McCown might just be like head coach material. I think people forget 3 years ago, he was getting that Texans job. It was done. And they were going to hire him, and the NFL got sued by Brian Flores, and Texans pivoted and hired David Culley, and then fired him and fired Lovie Smith. And we know the deal in D'Amico, so really 4 years ago. And that was McCown had only had high school coaching experience. He had no coordinator. He had no QB coach. He had no NFL coaching experience at all. And he was going to be an NFL head coach. He was that well beloved, commands the room. If you were to hire a Josh McCown, do I think you need to be extremely patient? Yeah, I do. Do I think there's a chance it would absolutely suck? Yeah, I probably would. Is there a chance you would be a year early on a guy rather than a year late and find an offensive-minded guy who's, could be a leader of men based on the way he played, based on the way he's respected, and based on the way he's kind of risen and helped rebuild Sam Darnold and, and the whole 9 yards? There's something to be said for that. And if you were to come over and it was Josh McCown and Ron Rivera, Ron Rivera is your DC, kind of helping Josh, kind of minefield through the ropes and whatever. Maybe it's not Ron Rivera. I'm just using it as an example. It would certainly be exciting. It would certainly be something to go, okay, I'd be willing to give the Jets the benefit of the doubt if they were to go that type of move, from that perspective. Just quickly on the GM search, names kind of all over the place. The names that I personally want to hit on are a few that I think are the top candidates. We've talked a lot of Mike Greenberg out of Tampa. He is a really strong candidate. I think he's a good candidate. I will say, I don't know how much he's run a draft and how much he's been involved in running a full offseason outside of the cap side of things. I don't have insight into that. That would be my concern, is you would have to bring over a couple of good guys from Tampa or a couple of good guys around the league. Look, the story is great. Jets fan, parents are living in Long Island, grew up a Jets fan, worked for the Jets, worked for Mike T, and all that stuff. That'd be awesome. All that said, again, I think he's in my top 3 or 4, and if the Jets hired him, I'd be intrigued. But there's a couple of guys that stand out more to me, just based on what I've heard about them throughout the league and kind of their reputation, things like that. The guy who they've not interviewed yet, John Eric Sullivan, Packers VP of Personnel. A lot of people credit him with kind of finding Jordan Love. He's been at the Packers for a really long time. He's really well thought of, really highly respected by people I highly respect in the league and in different front offices and things like that. So he's a name I'd be really intrigued if the Jets are able to get in the interview room and talk to. Alec Halaby, interviewed today, more on the analytics side, Harvard guy, but was involved in some of the scouting stuff, more of an analytically driven guy, which is fine. Been in the Eagles organization for, I believe, the last 17 years. He's certainly an interesting name. Again, maybe people have some PTSD from Douglas, but I don't know a ton about him other than kind of what you read up on, things like that. But it seems like he was highly respected, and it's at least something to kind of consider there. Mike Borgonzi is the big one for me. Probably the top candidate in this class overall, in this GM pool overall. Been with the Chiefs, intern with the Patriots, was at BC, Amherst before that, coaching. Has worked on the personnel side, has worked on the operations side, has been high up with the Chiefs for a very long time now. Brett Veach's right hand. If the Jets were able to pull off getting a Mike Borgonzi out of this cycle, you're feeling pretty damn good about yourself. No candidate's perfect, and I know people have some hesitancy about the Chiefs. Hey, it's Mahomes and Reed. Like, is it copying the kind of model of Bill and Brady back in the day, where anytime you took people from them, it was kind of a crapshoot whether they were actually good or not. He actually interned, back in New England when they had those guys, and worked with Dimitroff and Nagy and all these different guys who have interviewed in different things, and has worked under Scott Pioli for a long time and worked under Brett Veach, and is very much involved in their offseason, it seems like, from trades and scouting. And I like the idea of having a scouting background, a guy who's been in the draft room, having real influence, and been in free agency meetings, and been in finding UDFAs and doing these different things and working on deal. That's the type of candidate I think can come in here. And, the other name I just want to quickly hit on is Chris Spielman. Chris Spielman was requested today. Here's what I'll say about Chris. You won't find a more respected guy in the league than Chris Spielman. He is a culture changer. He's a guy who's spoken of as highly as it gets. He helped tremendously in the hiring process from everything you heard, and bringing in Brad Holmes, bringing in Dan Campbell, kind of transforming that Lions organization. If Rick Spielman wasn't part of the search firm, I think people would react a little differently. Do I think he's ready to be a GM? I'm not really sure, to be honest. I don't know how involved day to day he is in the scouting side of things, like and different things like that. Do I think if there was a world in which he would come here as I'm going to help oversee everything for a first time GM and be kind of a bridge? Sure, there's that option. Um, but he's a franchise legend in Detroit. I just have a hard time believing he's just going to leave for just that same type of job, um, working for the owner. So we'll have more, obviously, if anything kind of pops up, second wave of interviews. I expect the Jets to have a GM within the next 10 to 11 days. And then, coach going from there. Could happen in a different order, but likely it'll be GM in the next 10-ish days, and probably coach right after that, before, everyone heads down to Mobile for the Senior Bowl. So back on the feed on Saturday. Anything happens before then, obviously we'll hop back on. Appreciate it for listening, and we'll talk to you guys soon.